Right now, Japan is saying it is fed up with how the United States is treating it with so much disrespect and taking advantage of the Japanese economy. This is why Japan is saying they are ready to fight dirty using their US assets. As if that were not enough, Japan is also one of the largest investors in the US, providing jobs to over 800,000 Americans through its automakers such as Toyota, Honda, Nissan, Mitsubishi, just to mention a few. Yet what does Japan get from the Trump administration? It got tariffs aimed at crippling Japanese car market. As if that were not enough, the US is also asking Japan not to sell its semiconductor machines to China. If you think it could not get worse, think again, because the US is also targeting Japan's rice imports. It almost seems like the Trump administration wants the Japanese economy to collapse. But Japan is not folding its arms. They are saying enough is enough. If Japan should pull out its US investments, there will be trouble not just on Wall Street, but the US may not even have funds for its budget. So what exactly is going on, and how is Japan fighting back? Ensure you subscribe and watch till the end, because this situation is simply shocking. For over 70 years, Japan and the United States have been close allies, working together on trade, military defense, and technology. Japan supported US goals in the region, opened its markets to American businesses, and allowed US military bases on its soil. In return, it believed it had a dependable partner. But in 2025, that relationship is unraveling, and the blame, many say, lies with Washington, which has essentially betrayed its Asian ally. You won't believe this, but here's what the US government is now claiming. Japanese cars are a national security threat. Trump's administration is preparing to impose heavy tariffs, 25%, possibly rising to 30%. This isn't just a trade dispute. It's economic punishment aimed at one of America's closest partners. And it comes at the worst possible moment for Japan's economy and the millions who rely on US-Japan trade. As expected, Japan reacted with shock and dismay. Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba called the move extremely disappointing and regrettable, warning it marked a national crisis that demanded an unprecedented response. Japan's top trade negotiator, Ryosei Akazawa, was blunt. We have been telling them that the entire series of tariffs are regrettable and have strongly insisted they be revised. Finance Minister Katsunobu Kato warned these measures threaten both the Japanese and global economies. He said the government was deeply concerned. The tariffs would slow recovery, shake markets, and destabilize financial systems. Bank of Japan. Governor Kazuo Ueda added that the outlook for growth and inflation had weakened, pushing economic policy toward greater caution. But while Japan sees the tariffs as hostile, Washington tells a different story. US officials argue these measures are not punitive, but meant to rebalance decades of uneven trade. They claim Japanese automakers still benefit from regulatory and currency advantages, and that US car makers face barriers in Japan's own domestic market. The Trump administration frames the tariffs as a step toward fairness and national security, especially as the global auto industry shifts toward electric and autonomous vehicles, where American firms are trying to regain ground. Still, Japan has drawn a firm red line. Trade talks will go nowhere unless all new US tariffs are reviewed. Upon returning from high-level negotiations in Washington, Economic Revitalization Minister Akazawa stated bluntly that Tokyo cannot reach an agreement unless tariffs are addressed as part of a complete package. This marked a sharp shift in tone, revealing growing frustration in Tokyo. Even the Prime Minister admitted that Japan is still far from making any trade deal with the US. Japan's position now appears more defiant than diplomatic. Tokyo has made clear there will be no trade concessions unless Washington backs down on tariffs. But this dispute is bigger than just cars. It signals a deeper breakdown. The United States is no longer treating Japan as a trusted ally, but as a tool for its political agenda. That pressure could badly damage Japan's economy and hurt American workers whose jobs depend on Japanese companies. What many Americans don't realize is how crucial Japan is to the US economy. If Japan withdraws its support, the consequences could be devastating. Key US industries would face major disruption, and some might collapse entirely. Let me show you just how important Japan is to the US. Japanese car companies like Toyota, Honda, and Nissan have spent decades investing in the United States. They didn't just ship cars from Japan, they built factories in states like Texas, Kentucky, Alabama, and Mississippi. These factories now produce over 3 million vehicles each year, most of them for the US market. In 2023, Japanese car brands accounted for nearly half of all vehicles sold in America, with Toyota ranked as the #1 brand in the country. That's right. Without Japan, nearly half the cars on American roads wouldn't exist. And these aren't just any cars. They're well-built, affordable, and often more reliable than many American brands. In fact, in 2024, Toyota once again claimed the top spot, selling over 4.4 million vehicles. These companies also support jobs. More than 500,000 Americans work directly or indirectly for Japanese automakers. Some estimates even put the number closer to 840,000 Americans employed by these Japanese businesses. That includes factory workers, office employees, car dealers, and parts suppliers. In total, over 2 million US jobs depend on this industry. These workers earn more than $90 billion each year. They pay over $30 billion in taxes that fund local schools, hospitals, and infrastructure. These are not jobs that can be easily replaced. Now the White House is treating these same companies as if they are a threat. A tariff of 25% or higher will make their vehicles more expensive, and fewer people will buy them. That means Japanese companies could reduce operations in the US. Some factories may close. Some jobs will disappear. The pain will be felt not only in Japan, but in American towns that have come to depend on these companies. This is not the behavior of a friend. It feels like betrayal. Japan trusted the United States. It welcomed American companies, cooperated on defense issues, and respected US policy. In return, it is now being treated like an economic enemy. And no one in Tokyo seems to have seen it coming. The situation is even more complicated because Japan is facing pressure from two directions. On one side, the US is threatening its car exports with high taxes. On the other side, China is flooding world markets with cheap electric vehicles. These Chinese cars are made affordable thanks to government support. Japan cannot match those prices and still make a profit. So if Japanese cars become more expensive in the US because of tariffs, they'll also lose ground to Chinese competition. This means Japan is stuck between two global powers, one raising trade barriers and the other using state subsidies to win markets. Japan cannot win in this situation unless it changes direction fast. But fast change is difficult when a country is already under economic pressure. There is another issue at the center of this dispute: computer chips. Japan makes machines that are used to manufacture semiconductors. These machines are very advanced and hard to replace. About half of them are sold to China. The United States wants to stop that. Washington is trying to slow down China's progress in technology, and stopping Japan from selling chip equipment to Chinese companies is part of that plan. But Japan doesn't want to lose a major customer like China, especially now. That's where the car tariffs come in. By threatening Japan's auto industry, the US hopes to force Japan to cut off chip machine exports to China. This is not really about rice or car parts, even though those are the public talking points. It's about technology control and using economic pressure to get political results. The United States Congress recently sent a private and serious message to Japan. This letter was not shared with the public like others have been. It was sent directly to Japan's ambassador in Washington without any announcement, which shows how sensitive and urgent the US sees this issue. American officials fear that if China keeps building more chip factories, it could soon control half of the world's production of older but still widely used computer chips. These chips are used in cars, electronics, and even military equipment. In the letter, the US tried to argue that Japanese and other Western companies are not losing money by stopping sales to China. In fact, their stock prices have gone up. The US also pointed to its own government's large spending to boost its chip industry and said allies should do the same. The US is especially concerned about the Chinese tech giant Huawei, which it says is secretly building many of these chip factories. The letter warned that Huawei is hiding its involvement in these projects, and that's seen as a serious problem. So, what the US is doing here is pushing Japan to pick a side. It wants Japan to follow Washington's lead and help slow down China's rise in the chip industry, even if it means Japan loses business. Japan is not without options, but none of them are easy. It could give in to US demands, cut off chip machine sales to China, and hope the tariffs are removed. But that would mean giving up control over an important part of its economy. It would also mean angering China, which remains a major trading partner. Or Japan could choose to go its own way. It could invest more in electric cars and try to compete directly with China. It could build closer trade ties with countries in Southeast Asia or Europe. It could strengthen its domestic economy so it relies less on exports. At this point, Japan has no choice but to find other partners besides the US. The bigger problem is trust. When allies start using economic threats against each other, the relationship changes. Japan supported US goals for years, sometimes even at its own expense. To now be punished like this sends a message to other countries as well. It shows that even close US partners are not safe from political pressure. This could hurt American credibility in Asia. If Japan can be betrayed, what about South Korea, or the Philippines, or India? Countries that depend on US military and economic support may start looking for backup plans. And China could take advantage of this moment to offer better terms, deeper trade, and fewer demands. Interestingly, the US tariffs are backfiring. The US government placed tariffs on vehicles to protect American jobs, but the result was the opposite of what was intended. The cars that were taxed were not cheap imports from China. They were mostly made in the US, built by American workers using materials and parts from nearby countries under trade deals like NAFTA and its updated version, USMCA. Japan did not argue with the US in public. Instead, it took quiet but calculated steps. Nissan reduced production of one of its key car models, the Rogue, at its plant in Kyushu by 13,000 units. This was not a random decision. Nissan knew that the model would be hit by the new tariffs. Toyota also shifted investment to Thailand instead of putting more money into its US operations. These actions were not last-minute reactions. Japan had prepared for this kind of situation years earlier, especially after trade tensions first rose in 2018. When the time came, it simply activated those backup plans. This showed that Japanese companies no longer saw the US as a stable place to produce cars. But why stop there? What other steps would Japan take to secure its future? After reducing its US operations, Japan went further and started changing where it builds its cars. Japanese carmakers began putting more money into Southeast Asia, especially countries like Thailand, Vietnam, and Indonesia. These places became the new hubs for Japan's car production. Toyota spread its electric vehicle production across 5 different countries. Mazda invested $150 million in electric car plants in Thailand. But perhaps the biggest surprise was Toyota's $2 billion deal to build an electric vehicle factory in Shanghai, China. Not long ago, it would have been unthinkable for Japan to make such a large move into China, especially when tensions with the US were so high. But that's exactly what happened. Trust in the US had fallen so much that even China seemed like a more reliable partner. The decline of Japanese car production in the US won't be sudden or dramatic, but it's already underway. One by one, new car models are no longer being assigned to American plants. Quietly, strategically, Japan is shifting its bets elsewhere. The real question now isn't if the shift will continue, but how far it will go, and what that means for America's economic future. If you want to stay ahead of these global power shifts, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, because this story is just beginning, and what's coming next will shake the foundations of the auto industry and beyond.